when you see an announcement like last week where Facebook's literally changing their name to Meta and going Meta, and obviously they own the Oculus hardware and have for many years, you look at that as saying, well, wait a second, that's still a Web 2.0 version of something that should be more 3.0 and completely individual ownership. Am I getting that right?
Yes. Well, I think absolutely. And I think one of the things about Facebook, first of all, Mark Zuckerberg is an insanely smart man, right? Let's just to be clear here. So as far as I think, he's mapped out the future and he knows where decentralization and blockchain and NFTs are going. I mean, he even tried to push out Libra, right, before it became DM, right? Meaning that he's got an eye for this and he understands what's happening, which also means he understands actually what the power of NFTs represent, which could possibly unravel the current data kingdom that Facebook has set up. So how do you combat that? Well, the way to combat that is to say, well, first of all, we need to own that term. So by calling yourself Meta, you're actually, basically arranging a sort of a scenario where when people have dinner conversations or coffee chats and they talk about the metaverse, Facebook will be the natural sort of point of conversation because, oh, you're talking about the Facebook thing, aren't you, right? Because the majority of the world doesn't quite understand what metaverse is. It's still only a minority that appreciates Web3 and understands what it truly means. So you could say it is a masterful PR stroke to basically try to claim that. And frankly, very few companies could do that because even if a new company emerged, and there's many companies out there called Meta already, but in fact, our holding company of the Sandbox is actually called Meta, right? Okay. It was Meta, of course, long before Facebook calls itself Meta. But the issue is that, we're not that famous. We're not that influential. So we could call ourselves anything we want. It doesn't matter, right? But if Facebook calls itself Meta and rebrands itself, then everyone else will talk about that. And eventually they get to own the term metaverse, right? And I think this is really, I would say, the attempt here to say that when people think metaverse, they should be thinking Facebook. And therefore, naturally, they would be going to Facebook to experience the metaverse. And that to me is, arguably perhaps the biggest threat because, this is where what we want to prevent. Otherwise, it's going to be the same scenario as Web 2. That said, I don't think it can succeed because anytime you build in an open environment like this, typically speaking, the economies of scale and the benefits are open are typically larger. And so if you're trying to build a closed ecosystem, you always have to subsidize and sort of recreate and create the scales of economy necessary to maintain that. In the physical world, we see this happening already. Anyone who does not participate in sort of free trade or participate in sort of global trade and global economies, in whatever ways they do, they get locked out, right? And essentially, actually, the economies are non-sustainable. North Korea being perhaps a perfect example, that are really just propped up for, artificial reasons, but not actually really sustainable as an example, right? And the same will happen basically in the digital world. But Facebook is big enough that it can afford to sort of play this out and try to sort of dominate that space as far as they can, which is why it's so important to get digital property rights into everyone's hands. Because one of the reasons why the Web 2 framework has worked for Facebook is that people don't value data. Data is the most valuable resource on earth, right? And it's what powers, Facebook and Amazon and Tencent and Google and all those companies, right? All the company by market cap size, the biggest in the world, they're all data-rich companies. And that's because they're getting our data for free, farming it, and then basically selling it back to us in the form of advertising and services. And we're just willingly do it because we don't understand the value of data, because we don't appreciate that data ought to be a property that we create and therefore we own. Whereas in the physical world, though, if I buy a house or if I own this property, if it was inherited, I know it's mine and I will fight tooth and nail to ensure that it is always mine or I have the right to pass it on, which means I therefore care about the institution that protects it. I care about, who is elected in government. I care about democracy because I care about the system that ensures my property is protected. And we all have a stake in this because we all own property. So it protects itself as a result of this majority interest and this majority interest in the common goal. In the sort of framework of, where you don't own any data, which is basically Web 2, you're renters. Actually, you don't know what you're protecting. There's nothing you need to protect because I don't own it anyway. So yeah, you just go take it, right? And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's why if we can create the ownership paradigm and have people understand that digital property is valuable, in fact, and that it's something you ought to protect, then they start thinking, well, where is it stored? Who owns it and who controls it? Oh, wait a second. I don't want to go put that into some place that can take it away anytime. That's why we're in such a rush to deliver that. If you have a CryptoPunk, or if you've got like, a big piece of plot of land in Sandbox that could be worth $1 million, for instance, no way are you going to give it to someone who can take it away at any time.